Our PLC would be, we decided to do it on students would write algebraic expressions or an expression. We wrote our best instructional practices first, things that worked for us during the school year. As COVID happened, we had to adjust so there's going to be a list of a few or a lot of strategies just because we had to change it constantly. Some of the things that worked were team breakout rooms during math, celebrating them as well when they did things, accountability for their read and respond, use of Jamboard. So the kids got really used to using those Jamboards and they were able to create them on their own. Digital resources. So having the availability of students who were not at school, making sure that they also have those materials, because in my class, that was a big issue. Like not all of my kids would pick up stuff. So I would have to have something digital for them to be accessible at all times. The random reporter, that's part of SFA, using the rubrics to make sure that they understood what we were looking for as we were grading them. And making sure that also when they were in those breakout rooms that they were cooperating.
Yeah, and then so branching off from SFA, looking at our language arts and writing lessons, we made sure that we had more heterogeneous groups here, and we selected them sometimes based off the topic or based off student interests. So we were mixing them a little bit more. Students received an IXL agenda weekly so that they were always working on skills. So even if they didn't completely grasp what we did in class, they had an opportunity to grasp it on IXL. We did have an ELA intervention group. And those were our after school groups. In addition to an ELD intervention, we combined 5th grade. So Mr. Morales led ELD intervention while I led a math intervention. Culturally appropriate literature. Every time we had a Heritage History Month or anything like that, we attempted to incorporate that into our lessons. Modeling the stages of writing with personal experiences. We did a lot of pulling from student experiences this year because they definitely had a lot to share. And starting to implement research in them, especially now that they've had computers in front of them, and really honing in on what is plagiarism and what is a good source, and those sorts of things. So this one's moving into our math lesson.
So we have 2 responses for 2 of our students. So the Ms. Butler's is to the left and then my students to the right. Now, when we graded them, we made sure we took into accountability what they were able to do, because sometimes the students understood the process. They just didn't have all the parts of the process. So we knew, for example, on our student to the left, the student recognized how to the steps. He added instead of multiplying. So we figure out there's a couple of mistakes that were done, but at least they understood the process. They, instead of choosing the correct operation, they decided to multiply. Student did not know how to solve total problem by subtracting at the end. And then my kid was able to recognize that a touchdown is 7 points, and student identified that there was 2 teams. So my student took the problem literally, like 7 points per touchdown, and there's 2 teams, and then he added those, and not realizing that there was, but at least there was like some knowledge of what was brought from the problem.
Our medium students, so my student on the left, we see that were able to solve, once again, a multiple step problem, which was part of our standard, but was not able to write it in expression form. Remember, we're dealing with numerical expressions in like the beginning of algebra. So though they did get to the correct answer, they were not able to set it up as a numerical expression. So they had the mathematical, but not the setup. Julio's was very similarly, solved the multiple step problem correctly, but was not able to write it in expression form. And these are just kind of 2 ways that we saw students doing that.
Then up next, we have our high students. So our high students, as you can see, they added more detail to it. There's the parentheses in there, and they set up the expression correctly. And then they got to the answer. So both of our students were correct, with the exception of my kid, just because it was backwards. She ended up, well, technically it's correct because she put a negative in front of it, but the correct answer would have been just 14, but it works like how their little minds work, because to me, this is both of them are correct. She put negative in front of it, so it makes her problem correct.
So in looking at our class data, all of those screenshots came from Nearpod, which was one of our major things that we used for math. And so we were actually able to capture what students are just doing like on whiteboards in class. So we see what they were able to do versus in writing expressions and solving expressions. So we pulled two different Nearpod datas from this. We can see that solving expressions they did better on the right-hand side. Students seem more confident in solving the word problems without having to write out the expression form, which is kind of what we saw in a lot of our medium students. So we're actually writing out it using parentheses and correct PEMDAS was a little more difficult for them.
And this is one of our FIABs. So it kind of mimics what we learned from our Nearpods, that about 50% of our students reach or conquer that standard, and about 50%, we're in process of getting them to where we need them to be. So it was a 50-50. Right down the
Yeah, Julio, can you actually backtrack one? Because we skipped one slide.
skip one?
Yeah, I'll go over it. So we pulled our FIAB data. This was actually in the middle of our unit from when the FIABs were scheduled, but just kind of seeing how our students were progressing during the middle of our unit. And so we see here, and I will say, we look at this data as the fifth grade as a whole, because I was assigned more high students this year and Julio was assigned more of our lower students that are in intervention. But we see that a lot of our kids are either near standard or below standard at this point, with a few reaching above standard. So we knew as we were progressing to that next pie chart that we still had intervention to work as a whole group in addition to individual students.
And just on a side note, because I know most of us encountered this, so I only have 15 students that submitted their test. It was really, really hard to get a kid at home to submit a test. So I think that if I would have more kids to submit their tests, I probably would have, it would have grown, but it was really hard for them just to press that little submit button. Hopefully when we come back in person, that won't be a problem anymore.
And then this is something that we took from our kind of progress report on PowerSchool, looking at our standard numbers and operations, our standard 2. And we see basically the same trend here on a few different assignments, that a lot of our students were approaching the standard, with a few reaching it and a very select few reaching a 4.
So next step is to go back in person. Hopefully this gets all fixed, and then kids are going to be more engaged and we'll be able to have more time. Because I think the biggest aha moment for me this year is even though the kids are on a computer and it's something that they should be used to, kids need a lot of breaks, because this is not normal just looking at a computer. So hopefully next year we got this.
And I think we kind of progressed through the year of doing board work into under the document camera. And for math, we switched to primarily using Nearpod, where students could actively engage in it while we were on computers. And though I don't know if we'll use that exclusively next year, it's definitely a resource that Julio and I enjoyed using this year.
And hopefully the kids don't hate their computers after this year. They want to use them a little bit. Okay, let me stop presenting.
I'm going to review the 4th grade PLC progress. I'm going to start off with our target lesson, what our progress looks like, some best practices and strategies, our results, and then looking ahead to next year. So in our target lesson, students combined art and math to understand decimal notation for fractions and compare decimal fractions. So these are the standards that we addressed. Students were successful if they could create a mosaic art piece and identify how much of a particular color they used in fractions, decimals, and percents. So the first thing we did was meet in our as a PLC group to discuss our target lesson, what we were going to focus on. We planned the lesson and made sure that it aligned to the standards. After planning, we put our lesson to action and we taught it to our students. And then after the lesson was given, we had an assessment that was part of the lesson. So we were able to gather data and we discussed the results. And then based on that data, we were able to identify some students that needed some reteaching. And so we made small groups and then worked from there. Some best practices were giving our students second chances and allowing them to make mistakes. We engage them by appealing to their interests, and we use different levels of technology to engage our students as well. And this unit was integrated, so we incorporated art with math. Some other strategies we incorporated were to keep students engaged was the aspect of having art during math. This is beneficial for the low, medium, and advanced students. And then we leveled our assignments for students. So for the higher or advanced students, we encourage them to simplify fractions on their chart. And then for our middle students, we gave a visual example of what we were expecting. And then all students, we hope that all students will be prepared for 5th grade when they review this standard again. Some more PLC information. We completed one cycle. When we first began this cycle, students had basic knowledge of fractions. We used that work. I'm sorry, that strategies that we used that worked were incorporating visual arts and math to keep our students engaged, as I said. We noticed when we met, we noticed that one of our standards, our EL students were not successful due to some charts that were included. And so we made sure that we separated, when they did the assignment, that you'll see that the chart is separated so that they know which is decimals, fractions, and percents. I'll show you an example. So that helped them, having that chart, the visual chart. We did have many students not turn in the assignment, even after multiple attempts. So you'll see our data is missing. Some students did not turn it in, so you'll see that. These are some examples from Ms. Delk's class. And so students were to create a drawing, and then here's our chart that helped our ELL students. They told us the color, how many squares were in that color. They gave us a fraction, and then a percent, and then a decimal. So these are 2 examples, or 3 examples, sorry. And then you can see that on this third one, you can see, obviously the middle one is a more advanced student, but even the third example here, we can still grade them, even if they gave us, one example. We can see that they understand the concept. So that's what's great about standards-based grading. Here are some more examples, just some different art that was created. This one is, I think, a cat, the first one. All right. And so if you look at our data, we had some 4s, some 3s, some 2.5s, 2s, and 1.5s. We both had about, I would say like a third or a little bit more of our class that did not complete it. And, that's just the reality of what we've been dealing with all year teaching virtually. We did discover some differences in our grading when it came to the 4s and the 3s. And I think what would have helped, what we plan to do in the future is make sure that we address in our rubric, we address exactly what a 4 is and versus a 3, so that we don't have that that difference in grading. So Looking forward to next year. Sorry, this is a bit long, I think. We look forward to beginning the year with PLCs much sooner in the year, since we already know how they work, because we did find them beneficial. We're going to allow time for backwards planning, make sure our units are integrated, and an emphasis on student interest. Throughout the year, we realized that that was a key thing to keep students engaged, and then continue to analyze our data. And that is all. Thank you.
All right.
We were big on data and talking to each other about data. But first, I'm just going to discuss best instructional practice. For us, every lesson, we always start with a YouTube video to either talk about vocabulary or to model or show the students how a problem or work should be done. We were big with visuals. We use Nearpod a lot. We use Jamboard a lot. Some of us started using it later, but we finally got onto the Jamboard club. We were big on doing small group work, whole group instruction, and then small group. We gave students independent work and homework. We did a lot of think alouds. We modeled for the students everything, and we love to do SIR models because it promoted higher order thinking. We were more focused on the students explaining their reasoning and explaining their thought process. So we would use SIR models quite a bit. Sometimes we would actually use it a lot independently for our higher order thinking kids and middle thinking kids. And then for our students who needed more support, it would be more in group work that we would have them explaining their thought process. For the data, we're very visual, so we had our chart and we would always implement our data into the chart just to see growth or if they need support. So for example, because Faith is right here in the middle, we would have a lot of missing quizzes. These are all quizzes, the data from the quizzes that we would give. This would be for fractions, understanding fractions, understanding fractions on the number line, and equivalent fractions. So as we see the students, if they need support the following week, we would reteach that standard and then move on to adding more to the teaching another standard. And eventually we would have a summative assessment to see how the students are doing. A lot of times students would be missing their work, or they don't always come into class, stay the whole time. So it made it a struggle to help the kids who really needed it. But we definitely try to reach out, and we have seen more students participating, especially with using Nearpod videos and Jamboard. And then looking ahead, Faith.
So based off of our data, you can go to the next slide, Janelle.
Okay.
Based off of our data, we realized we needed more planned higher order thinking questions. We wanted to continue to meet on a weekly basis. For us, it was every Wednesday. We would meet for like almost an hour and a half. And then we wanted to make sure next go around, we include more culturally proficient, more culturally relevant word problems. That way they can relate better, and that they would be more willing to participate in the conversation. And then we wanted to focus more on backwards planning. Next slide. And so for looking ahead for our students, we want to allow more time to collaborate. I think it was just given COVID, we had a lot just to backtrack on. So we gave more time to instruction. But now that hopefully once we're all be in a classroom, we can allow more collaborative work time and give the students the time to actually lead more of the conversation and just reflect more on work. And one of those ways was the SIR model that Janelle was talking about. It was the claim, evidence, reason, and rebuttal. And we couldn't always get so much to the rebuttal because that would have been more of like a walk around to see their posters. And that was actually a part, like our kids were excited to do that. We're looking forward to, because unfortunately we could only do it orally instead of them actually getting a chance to walk around. So I think that's something just like as the teachers, we were excited to get to see next time around.
Our initial, like what we decided to focus on as a PLC was math specifically. And our main focus was how to assess our math, because it was very difficult getting our second graders to all like point their whiteboards at the screen at the same time, or, you know, to fill out things online at the same time. I know like fifth grade strategy of using Nearpod is something that like helped them. So we as a PLC tried to figure out what would help our second graders. And we decided that doing an exit ticket on Google Forms was the best way and the most consistent way for us to gain data at the end of every math lesson. So what we would do is we would create a slideshow, and we would include all their expectations, vocabulary, all instructions, any word problems that we would have them do. Everything was on a slideshow that we would present to them. We used the gradual release model. So each PowerPoint had it was either an I do, a we do, a you do together, or a you do. So all the students knew exactly where we were in the lesson at any point in time. And then at the very end of our slideshow, we would, after they did activities together, then we would give them their exit ticket on Google Forms. I'm going to skip a couple of these. So we're going to go into what that actually looks like for each unit. We did a measurement unit, a money unit, and a time unit. So I'll hand it over to Jessica.
Yes. So for measurement, excuse me. So for measurement unit, if you want to go to the next slide for me, please.
Sorry.
My computer's lagging really bad. So it's okay.
Yeah, mine is not working as well. Okay, there we go.
It's showing. Okay, there we go. So with this one, the reason why I kind of wanted it up is because, so we use something in this one, it's called boom cards. And it was really, really difficult within the measurement unit for us to actually see them holding the rulers correctly and to make sure that they were measuring exactly right. Because in the very beginning, we were trying to, okay, yeah, 4 inches sounds about right for that. Or we were trying to really think, okay, I guess that would make sense. And then one day I happened to find this thing called boom cards. And what it is it would have an insect right there. And the student had to drag the insect over to the ruler and had to put it in the correct spot and then pick the correct measurement. And we were actually able to get that data right away, and they could retake it as many times, and it would take the average of how well they did over however many times they took the boom card cycle. And it was extremely helpful, and we got to understand our students' data on whether or not they fully understood the standard of measuring. Next one. Okay, so in the very beginning, as you can see, this is with our exit tickets. We were all really low in the very beginning. We would make sure, see, we gave exit tickets at the end of every single lesson that we did every single day. So our students mine would get very excited about our exit tickets. So in the very beginning, they didn't do too hot, but as you can see, we all grew with it. So in the middle, they started to understand it a little bit more, and by the end of it, they were all pretty proficient in understanding measurement. And then here's just a, little line graph to show you exactly what it looked like in our growth. And that's it for measurement.
So I'm gonna take over the time unit. Oops, sorry. So some of the strategies we used for time, because I don't, like personally my classroom, time was very boring for my kids. Like they didn't like to do it. They didn't want to figure it out. They had their, you know, like digital clock on their computer. Why do they need to figure out an analog clock, right? So I really focused on engagement with our time unit. So what I did was I related our times to what they look like at school, making sure, you know, like our transition times, and like times that they like dismissal, when they went to SFA as opposed to when they went to homeroom, like times that actually applied to these kids. And I also added a lot of other elements that engaged them. I know some of my students want to be YouTubers when they grow up. So I incorporated a lot of that YouTuber, like you need to know how to tell time if you want to be a YouTuber, because you have to know how long you're going to stream for. You have to know when you're going to take your breaks. You have to be committed to those times. So I added a lot of that real world application to our lessons. And a lot of my kids absolutely love Pokemon. So I just added a lot of word problems with Pokemon in it. So I'm just going to give you guys like an example of what our PowerPoints would look like, just really quick. Let me see. Okay. So we would just start off with our objective. We would go into materials, vocabulary that they needed to know. We would start with I do's, then a we do with our all of our kids. And then they would go into their breakout rooms and they would do a you do together. So to make it more engaging for them, I like polled all my kids and I was like, okay, what YouTubers do you guys watch? I put real YouTuber names into my chart here. I gave them stream times and I told the kids, okay, you guys have to find the elapsed time. Like how many YouTubers only stream for a half hour? How many YouTubers stream for a whole hour? And so I gave them 10 minutes in their breakout rooms to just figure that out. So things like this really helped with my engagement, and they did a lot better on their exit tickets because of it. So I'm going to go back over here to our exit ticket data. And this one, we didn't see as much growth in time as we did for measurement. So it stayed fairly consistent, but we did see a small jump in progress with our kids at the end of the unit. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Mijares now.
So when we started our money unit, there was a lot of interest in it, and there was but not. I did even start asking, like when we had conferences, our last conferences, I began to ask parents. I was, curious. Okay, what have you gone over with your children about money? And I was surprised. I thought from other years we usually had kids, at least they knew the coin names and the coin values, but a lot of parents were telling me it was a high percentage that the kids did not know their coin names and they did not know the values, a lot of them. So the good majority that we started off with the kids really, really low. And then obviously too, because of COVID, some parents mentioned they didn't want to, they weren't working with change a lot. And they were basically using, cards or going online to make purchases. So that's something, that's how we started, just the kids really, really low. So we had our unit. It was a pretty long unit, but I'm glad that we took the time to just give the kids a good foundation, because they, by the time we finished, they learned they knew the names of the coins, they knew the values, they knew how to add, how to exchange, combine. And so overall, I think it was a really fun lesson for us teachers and for the kids as well. So obviously the engagement was high. And in the beginning, when we asked them, okay, what do you know about money? So they knew, money's used to buy things that you want and things that we need. So that was helpful, even though they were so low, with their knowledge of money. It helped a lot, the high interest in it. So we can go please to the strategies that we used as well. Like Ms. Rolette showed earlier, we used our slides, and for example, we know we couldn't use manipulatives, with the kids. So we used a lot of online, like on the slides, whenever we did the you do activities, we had coins that they could move around, like click and drag activities, basically, that we try to make it as much as as much as possible to make it like an activity where they could actually move stuff around, and so that was something, and we use word problems too that really engage them. Like, for example, we use like, okay, so if you had, it was I was wanting to share as well, but I can just read what for one of the lessons we had, for example, let's add bills. So this was adding bills. And we had a drag and drop activity where they had to drag and drop bills to make, for example, $60. And the word problem said, Ray wants to buy a Super Mario 3D World game. It costs $60. And we had the bills on the side, and they had to click and drag. Basically, they had to count the bills. So it basically involved identification, knowing the value, and knowing how to add. So it was a couple of skills all in one, and they had to click and drag. So that made it like an interactive activity. So our progress overall, like for example, my class, they were really low. Miss Roulette and Miss Melissa's class, their class was, they began higher. But for some reason, I know this is the differences within the classes too. Like my class, for some reason, they were just really, really low. But over time, I saw some growth. And Miss Roulette's class, they stayed pretty much, on level, at the same level they started off. In Miss Melissa's class, they struggled a little bit, but overall we all saw growth with our students, and it was just we just built a pretty good foundation, I believe, for with money, and so they'll be ready for whatever our third grade teachers throughout the next year in regards to money and overall in math. So I'm very pleased with what we accomplished this year with our PLCs. We grew a lot professionally ourselves, and our students, we saw a lot of just engagement and a lot of growth in our students. So that was overall like an excellent, just an excellent way for us to grow as professionals and with our students as well. So that was pretty much it for my part of this presentation.
So I want to go back to this, this slide really quick. So one of our next steps was, when we say beginning, we mean like the exit ticket that we gave them at the very beginning of the unit. So typically those beginning exit tickets are like foundational level, right? Like we were just asking them, giving them like a picture of the coin and then asking them to identify it. So our kids did really well at the beginning, but technically it's not pre-assessment data. So I bring this up because our next steps is to include pre-assessments in that data collection, because we didn't give any pre-assessments. We would just give that lesson and then give an exit ticket after the lesson. So to get more accurate data and to see how well students are progressing compared to the knowledge that they bring in, we would start giving those pre-assessments at the beginning of those units. So those were our next steps. We would continue the gradual release model because that works very well. We would continue collecting data from exit tickets because that just works. I think it would work really well in person and online. So personally, like no matter like how we come back next year, I'm going to continue doing these exit tickets because I just think it's a great way to collect the data, and it's like less work for me. I don't have a stack of like homework sheets that I have to grade every day. So I think that's just an efficient way to do it. And what really helped our PLC is splitting up the work between the three of us. Like it's very difficult when one person has to do their own lesson plan, their own slides, their own exit ticket. It's just a lot of work for one teacher to do. So we would split up those roles between the three of us, and it just made it a lot easier. Our workload was a lot simpler. We were able to do that little extra, give the kids that little extra activity for their you do together. So we're going to continue doing that for our next steps. Thank you. Okay.
All right, so we are going to start off with our best instructional practices and strategies. So I'll start with the smaller two first, and then I'll talk about small group instruction. So we used quizzes a lot just as to create healthy competition within the classroom and a learning environment. And we used it for lessons as well as assessments. It encourages learning, and we got a lot of data from it because you can just, download the data after they take their quizzes. Nearpod we used a lot in math, and it tied other standards to it as well. So once we introduced our standard, there was significant growth in engagement and assessment, and we noticed that across the board in all classes. So when we first started off, we were just doing whole group instruction, and then when we did Nearpod, it engaged the kids more, so we noticed huge growth. And we used it for addition and subtraction from 20 to 100, shapes, time, and money. In the shapes unit, there's a lot of Nearpods that allowed the kids to go other places and use that in real life. So they could go into a store. We didn't add it on there, but we did it with multiplication, exploring multiplication. So they were able to go into a store, look at the rows and the columns and start their foundational multiplication that way. And then our largest instructional practice that we all loved was small group instruction. And we used IXL data to group our students with previous assessments and student feedback. And so we would have them get into small groups after whole group instruction. And we would work with scaffolded lessons, many lessons with the various groups. So we had a low, a medium, and then a high group. And there was different engaging activities still based on the standards. So we'd be using breakout rooms. 2 groups would be doing independent work and 1 group would be working with the instructor.
Okay, data celebrations. With the strategies that we put in place with our PLCs this year, we mostly focused in math, but it even worked with our ELA. 64% of are on level or above in reading in SFA, and our kids jumped about 30% across the board in math this year. Most of our ones are really just because they weren't even in class. Next steps for next year would be we want to look more into how we can incorporate science and social studies in our math and ELA programs, and then just like everybody else with pandemic teaching, how we're going to build on student achievement and bring everybody together next year. We just did more of a big picture in our presentation. So that's it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Here we go. So I'll be quick. I know we're running shy on time here. All right. Here was our learning intention. We're going to learn how to add and subtract within 10 and write a number sentence to show what we know. So in our success criteria, obviously, I can add and subtract within 10, write a number sentence that shows the problem and solution. Here are some of the techniques we use throughout the unit. Use of whiteboards to practice skills. The kids love the whiteboards and the whiteboard erasers, and definitely taking advantage of that. We used bear counters and some of the linking cubes as manipulatives to help kids understand what was going on. We had them draw pictures of their favorite items to help illustrate the problem and to find the solution. So students can draw their own number line to help them solve math problems, create number bonds within given sentences, and they must interpret the correct plus or minus sign while writing their number sentence. All right, so we have our 3 targeted lessons and our summative assessment here. So targeted lesson number 1 was to fill in the number line. Lesson 2 was to make 10. And number 3 was number bonds. Our summative assessment for the unit was Unit 12 math test. How are we going to respond to the students who aren't up to grade level there? So if they're below grade level, we assign more IXL tasks that related directly to the standard to give them additional practice. Reteach the lesson during small group time. We provided Monday tutoring sessions as well as our tutoring sessions after school. And then we regrouped math small groups based on the data that we were seeing. All right. And for students above grade level, we pushed to rigorous, push them to a higher level of rigor, and we did some extension activities. So progress for our year, students have been assessed to the standard. They given opportunity for intervention and had access to one-on-one tutoring. So here overall as a grade level, here is the mastery percentages for each. We had 39% at mastery, 28% below, and 33% above mastery. All right. Also, I think that we were able to increase our participation in the tutoring sessions throughout the life of our PLC. So some of our strategies that work best: offering the one-on-one and small group tutoring, putting mini lessons on Class Dojo to keep parents informed about the curriculum and the academic vocabulary for the lessons. Small groups during class have been effective, and using the whiteboards, worksheets, modeling the right behavior, and reinforcing the key concepts using IXL, giving the students an opportunity to practice. Moving forward, we're going to continue working together to help students succeed with the lessons. Continue to offer our school tutoring. Well, maybe not from this point forward, because I think we're done with that. Reach out for more parent involvement. Continue to make the curriculum culturally relevant to students and adapt it to real world situations that they're going to experience. My favorite example of that is the guy that goes to Costco in the math problem and buys 87 watermelons. So improve the data collected from students to continue to see their growth. And that's it.